welcome to the Jeff Goldberg studio. Today we have Jeff Goldberg with us, and we have a question answer session where we're going to ask Jeff about how he prepared for his Mumbai Terror Attacks, the David Coleman Headley Show. We have over 25 shows that we have performed in various venues at the Royal Opera House, NCPA, at the studio itself. And we would first like to ask, what is the first step in your approach to character?
Oh God. Well, generally, when I start to think about the work that I do as an actor, I'm a method actor, okay? And I know that it's a bit taboo of a thing to say sometimes, especially in certain parts of the acting world. But there's something to be said for that traditional sort of approach to the method. And the first thing I ask myself when I approach any character is, what do I see in that character that I see in myself? That's very important to me, that there's some vibration between the character and me. Now that vibration could be something that is very one-to-one, which is, maybe it's an experience I share with the character, maybe it's a trait that I share with the character, maybe it's a piece of my own life that, I went through something that the character has been through, albeit emotional or even just sort of like your own personal history. Or it could just be something in my imagination that, really kind of makes me think, gosh, I've always wanted to be that person, or I've always wanted to explore that side of my life. So I think the first thing that I do when I approach a character is ensure that there's something in the character that's on the page of the script that I can say, yeah, I get that guy. I've met him, or I want to meet him. And when I say I want to meet him, I want to meet him within myself. So that's the first real thing I look at. And in the case of David Coleman Headley, that was kind of a really easy one. It's not that I wanted to be a terrorist mastermind, but it was more, I live in South Asia, in Bombay. I've lived here for about 10 years now, which is really incredible. And I got here, though, in 2006. So, I first moved here in 2009, but I'd come to the city in 2006, fell in love with it from literally the first day. And when the 26/11 attacks occurred, of course I was aware of them, I paid attention to them. And then years later, when through the autopsy of those events, it emerged that David Coleman Headley, an American Pakistani, was responsible for the forward planning of the attacks. It really shook me to my core for a variety of reasons. First and foremost was because, wow, how'd that happen, right? That's a pretty incredible question. Like, geez, how'd that happen? And then secondly, being somebody who lived in Mumbai and everyone around me had a very personal story around 26/11, again, it was kind of like, wow, this is really something that I can touch. It's not a piece of history that belongs in a book. It's something where, to get real information, I just have to ask the person next to me. And then the third thing that really kind of hit me was, as an American actor in Bombay, there aren't that many roles that I can play believably. Of course, there's the standard British chap who doesn't like Indians, which we see all the time in commercial cinema. And that doesn't really, I don't see anything in myself that resembles that. I live in India, I love India, and the idea of, bonking Indian people on the head with nightsticks doesn't really appeal to me too much. So that's why I don't do that often. And in the case of David, it was like, wait a second, you got a 21st century guy who's American that has a story in Mumbai. Wait a second, I'm a 21st century guy living in Mumbai who's American, and maybe there's something that can be in this story that will vibrate with me. So that's how I started to approach it. And as I did, it just got weirder and weirder. Because David's story is very unusual. It's a very unusual story. And as I started to look at the facts around the 26/11 events, as I started to look at the news around David, the reporting around David, the closer I got to the material, interestingly, the less I seemed to understand it. And it was very weird because when you research something, and I'm somebody who spends a lot of time researching, that's very important for me. The closer you get to a topic, the more in focus it becomes, right? This wasn't the case. The closer I got to the topic, the more I started to wonder, how did this happen? How did no one notice him? How did he get away with it? And those questions really confused me. They also excited me a lot. So I think that, to just generally answer your question, I just need to feel the character on the page and within myself. And whatever the gravity that creates for me, I'm immediately interested. And in the case of David, there were just 3 things that were immediately obvious to me that I just was like, yes, I want to tell this story. So, yeah.
Okay. So you talk about researching a character and then matching the vibration with it. Like you feel you understand the character better as much as you're researching. But a lot of facts about David Coleman Headley are not in public domain. So as a writer and an actor, how do you go about finding those particular facts to build character more holistically?
It's a really great question, actually. I think, as a writer and as an actor, in the case of David Coleman Headley, in both cases, it's an act of creation. The writing is an act of creation, where you're out of the ether in your head, this great void, at least it's a void in my head, trying to find something that you want to tell, a story you want to tell. And in the case of an actor, it's an act of creation because you have to take this 2-dimensional piece of paper and breathe life into it and turn it into a 3, 4, 5-dimensional moment in the life of this human being. And I relish that. I love that work. It's kind of why I do what I do. Now, in the case of David, you're right. David is a tricky one because there's a lot of material that is not in the public domain or not visible in the public domain. And let me explain that. What I mean is that as you start to research the story and the life of David Coleman Headley, you really have to be very smart and follow the trail correctly. In as much as that, the Indian reporting in the Indian news had one very clear objective. The American news had a very different objective in the way of reporting it. And everyone's perspective and their agenda was very clear in the material that you would look at. So I tried to be as objective as possible. And the biggest thing in the research phase for me is, I'm one of these people who I'm just constantly, like if I read a line about a book that references something, I immediately go and buy that book. I'm like an orangutan. I go from one vine to the next. I just constantly get as much material as I can. I have stacks of books and I copy and paste every article I can get my hands on. I watch every film I can to do the research phase of the writing. And then in the case of the character creation, I try to be as close to the events of the script as possible. So in the case of David Coleman Headley, I really actually went out and visited all the sites that were attacked in 26/11. I walked around. I've been to the Chabad House in Nariman Point, in Calaba Causeway. Been to Leopold's. I've of course been to the Taj, the Trident Oberoi, the train station, and I went very specifically for the research of my character, knowing in my head, walking around, looking at these places, imagining, what must have occurred. And I had a lot of photographic evidence as well that I collected. So, I would literally walk like up to certain places where the photograph had been taken and look at the particular thing through that frame. So I tried to bring myself as close as I could to the actual locations. I spoke with people, and 26/11 is a lot like an event that occurred in my home city of New York, which is everybody knows what they were doing, with whom they were, when they heard about it. Like they all remember that phone call they got from a friend who was like, where are you right now? And I spoke with people, in my family and just a larger sort of sphere of folks around me, just to get a sense of what people went through. And unanimously it was fear, fear, confusion, anger. And that was really fascinating because, when you're dealing with a story like David's, you really want to make sure that you don't glorify what had happened, you have to really respect the sensitivities of the city, of the people, and I was very, very aware of that, extremely aware of that, right from the beginning of my work, actually. So, yeah, the research was a massive importance. It took me about 5 years to get it right. It's the longest I'd ever researched anything. Funnily, I mean, it's not so funny. What I did was, I had all these photographs of like, you know, the Taj burning and, you know, unfortunately, like, bodies strewn across the train station. And then I had all the terrorists, you know, pictures of them, all cutouts. And in my second bedroom at the time, which was my office, I took up a whole wall, like an 8-foot wall, and I turned it into like a murder investigation. And at the time, my little boy was, I think 4 or 5 years old, and his mother forbade him to go into my office. She was like, you cannot go into Daddy's office. It's too scary. And I would find myself very often just looking at that wall and looking at the connections and just sort of wondering how that all came together to be that one event. And the research was fascinating. It really was. And I think that one of the coolest things actually about doing the show as many times as we have is when I meet people who either were at the events themselves or have done the research themselves. There's this incredible moment after the show where they just want to talk to me. It's very touching. They just come up to me and they say, "Can I hug you?" Which is a little weird because I'm playing a terrorist, but sure, you know, I'm all about hugs. I'm a hugger, so you know, let's go. But then they just want to talk, and it's a real catharsis for them to talk about what they went through, what they know. They ask me questions. As a matter of fact, actually, we had this was really strange. We'd done the first round of shows, and we had some really wonderful response from the critics, the theater critics. And one day, one of the people on the team tells me a crime reporter from the Hindu wants to talk to you. And I'm thinking to myself, a crime reporter wants to talk to me?
At the studio.
Yeah, he calls me up. He says, you know, "Hi, I'm a reporter on the crime beat for the Hindu. Can I talk to you?" And I said, "Sure, okay." And he came to the studio, and we sat down, and he had been following the story of David Coleman Headley from the crime angle for his newspaper for years. He actually attended when David was questioned by the Indian authorities. It was done by video link. So he was in prison in the United States, but there was a video link to an Indian court here, and he was this journalist was in the audience, and he watched that. So he and I really had this wonderful chat and back and forth, and it was fascinating to hear his take on everything, just because he had a very different perspective, because he was looking at it through, you know, the eyes of crime and criminality and journalism, which I actually wound up being, I interviewed him more than he interviewed me. So yeah, so the response to the research has been the thing that has most surprised me, because when you do a show, you don't usually get that. You know, I've directed many shows in my life, and I've been fortunate enough to be part of some really interesting stuff, but I've never had people want to talk to me about how I did what I did. That was really strange to me. And as a matter of fact, I've even had actors and friends and audience members who have come to see the show, and then the next day I'll get a message from them. "Jeff, I was up all night researching David Coleman Headley." And this has happened to me a few times. And it's just, okay. And I think the number one thing that people say to me about the show unanimously is, "I didn't know that." They didn't know what really went on. And I think that that is very important, and I don't view myself as a messenger by any way, shape, or form, but I think what's really important is helping people recognize the collective history of this moment that they all went through. And for some reason, nobody seems to know very much about it. And I think the show helps people have that conversation, and that I'm very pleased with.
I've been part of the studio for long now, and I've seen multiple shows of David Coleman Headley, and they're very frequent, like they're scattered across the year.
Mm-hmm.
So we do shows all around the year.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that fascinates me is like how you slip in and out of the character very easily now. Can you say about that?
Oh gosh,
It's a hard thing to do.
It makes me
Like,
say, you make me sound like a terrorist, which is like, it's okay. Those that know me well might think I've got a few characteristics of David's. Well, the thing is, Pranav, the research phase for me is so intense. It's so intense, and when I started doing David Coleman Headley, I had just finished doing another show where I was playing a rock and roller. So I had long hair and I got these fake tattoos, and I knew I was done with that show. So David began, the Mumbai Terror Attacks experience began, and I shaved my head. And literally from one day to the next, my look changed. And it's a very interesting thing in life, especially as an actor, because you're sensitive to the way people receive you. To suddenly people kind of view you as this like rock and roll guy, and then suddenly people look at you and they're like, why does Jeff look like he's gonna beat me up? Or why does he look like a bad guy now? And I grew this really thick beard.
Yeah.
My beard was I grew it for like 3-4 months. So the look was also part of the research, because suddenly I looked different, and the reception of that look was very powerful for me, even in my real life. A very good friend of mine, I went to his house one night, and he didn't even recognize me, and that was really cool. I told him who I was, because why are you at my house? But he and I got to talking, and it was fascinating to have that experience. So at that first blush of shows, that first 3-4 months when I'm really preparing things, I live it completely, totally. I had to go to New York just before the premiere of the show because my mother was being operated on. So I was in my mom's hospital bed, she's fine. But I was sitting there and I was in character, and even my brother and my father and my mother, they all were kind of like, Jeff, what are you doing? Like, what's going on? What's with the beard? And that was really interesting. So that very intense time that I have before I premiere a show, I live the character for months. And then after I do the show, I live the character even more. I'm really in character even when I'm not supposed to be, which is not great sometimes for my personal relationships, but such is life, I guess. However, once you do that, you start recognizing what it is about you and the character share.
Yeah.
And as you start to revisit the show over time, that shared part of yourselves is not something that you abandon. But I think the most important thing that I do, or I try to do, is, and this is why I love theater so much, is every time I do the show, I ask myself, what do I want to say this time? The script hasn't changed. The story hasn't changed. But am I angry about these events? Am I more desperate? Where am I in my own life? Where's Jeff in his life right now? Because I want to know where I am, so that when I walk into David's life and start living that character between curtain and curtain, I can bring as much of myself to that. And it's very funny. Actors, sometimes the characters you play become your best friends. They become the people you share your most intimate moments and secrets with. And David, of course, is not a nice person, but I've grown to be comfortable with the existence of that character in my life. And I don't slip into it, I wouldn't use that word, but I know what doors I need to knock on within myself to find David. I know that sounds a little bit like I'm a psychopath, which I totally assume as part of myself, but I accept it.
Just a side note, your mother didn't see you bald before.
No, she didn't. My mom, the first shows, she didn't see me bald, but I had the beard already.
Yeah.
And my mother's not a fan when I have a beard. She's typical Jewish mom. She wants me to be clean shaven. She wasn't thrilled with the beard. And then when I shaved my head, she was even less thrilled. And that look stuck around for about 2 years, 18 months, yeah.
So we're speaking about how you knock on certain doors and it becomes much more incrementally, you get to know much more of David Coleman and yourself.
Mm-hmm.
But what are the challenges that you encounter? Because each time you're doing it in a different angle.
Mm-hmm.
You're asking yourself, am I angry or where am I in my life?
Mm-hmm.
So there must always be a new set of challenges that comes up.
Oh yeah, for sure. Well, the first challenge is, I'm playing David Coleman Headley, and this is a despicable human being.
Yeah.
And he's exactly where he belongs to be, which is in jail for the rest of his life. And I never forget that. I don't forget that I'm playing a criminal, that I'm playing somebody who is responsible for the death of many dozens of people, and I take that very seriously. And I know that when I'm telling this story to an audience in Mumbai, I'm speaking to them about events of their own lives. I take extreme care in the way I approach that, because it's not a question of sensitivity, it's a question of humanity. I don't want to offend somebody in a very human way. It has nothing to do with politics, it has nothing to do with religion, it has nothing to do with the fact that you are a human being and you live through this, and this is something that really touched you, and I don't want to be insensitive to that. So the first thing I always remind myself as I get into David is this is a really bad person, and he's not a nice guy, and he didn't do nice things, and he used the tools of his personality to achieve the worst ends. So I'm very clear about that every time I do him. As for, is it tricky each time? I think the most important thing that I do as an actor is I'm always asking myself what's going on with me. I'm very sensitive to that. And it's not even, and maybe that's why I'm an actor, because I did that before I had become one. But I always ask myself that, what's up, Jeff? How are you? So I'm pretty in tune with myself, for the most part. And I just make sure that I have some very clear sense of what I want to do with the character this time. But the tricky part is definitely not making it stale. Because, okay, people that come see the show, it might be their first show. People like you have seen it, you might have seen it more than I have. And funnily enough, there are a bunch of people like you. There are people who've seen the show like 6, 7 times.
More than that, yeah.
Yeah, really, it's crazy. I know there's one actor who's come to our studio to train, and she once confided in me. She's like, Jeff, I chose to do this because I saw your show, and it's the greatest honor I could ever receive. So the tricky part, though, is making sure it's not stale, making sure that it's still fresh, because there are going to be people in the audience who haven't seen it before.
Yeah.
And I don't want them to feel like they're watching something that's been done and done and done. I want them to feel that energy. And David is someone who has a lot of energy. He's a very high energy individual. And all the research I did, that came through. To pull off what he pulled off, to charm his way through the world the way he did, he had to have a tremendous amount of energy. So I need to make sure that I have those stores of energy within me. Usually means a good night's sleep before the show, and just really being in tune with myself, and making sure that bounce in the character is there. Yeah. So.
One question that method actors often face and encounter is like how, when you're preparing for a character, how it manifests in your day-to-day life, because you're actually living the character.
Yeah.
And a character as tricky as David Coleman Headley is, something.
Yeah, there's an old sort of thought going around among actors, which is, if you get so into the character, how do you switch them off, right? How do you leave the character in the theater or on the set? And I think, I've been lucky enough to work with some really brilliant people over the years, and I've witnessed how everybody has a system to do that. But I think the thing that's really important for an actor to do is just have one or two things in their life that really make them feel like them, you know? So if you feel yourself kind of swept up by the sort of emotional wave of your character and the power of who they are, you have to have a secret garden that belongs to you, right? Like a place that's yours. Mine is my son. I have a little boy, and you know, he doesn't. I mean, he knows what I do, of course, and you know, he knows David Coleman Headley, and he's very glad that I have hair right now because he was tired of the bald head. But he, you know, he grounds me because, you know, with him it's just about being with him. It's about toys, and it's about the cartoons he likes, and it's about the things that he and I do as his dad. So that's very grounding for me. I'm also somebody who is a gigantic fan of music, so I'm constantly listening to different types of music, and I have a couple things that are, you know, really like that. You know, that's my song right there. That's mine. So music helps me. My son helps me, and I think that it's very important for every actor as you start to take on roles, especially challenging roles, that you have left yourself a trail back to yourself. But yes, of course, you definitely have times in your life where traits of your character emerge. I don't know that that's a bad thing. All of the characters I've ever played have made me more in tune with myself. So let's use David as an example. David is a very charming person, and he used his charm to the ends of hurting people, and he manipulated people, yes? I've heard it said about myself that I'm charming, but I take extreme care to not hurt people. I'm very sensitive to people's feelings, something I really think a lot about, actually. And whilst I see how what David did and what Jeff does, I recognize that we're both using, in a way, the same thing, which is our personality to befriend or to, you know, ingratiate ourselves to someone. And but I see the choice David made, because I know that that choice is there, and I know that you can use that part of your personality to have that power. I make a conscious choice not to. So the avenues that David chose, I make sure I stay away from. And every character I've played, I've seen that, where there are choices the character made that I would not. I've played alcoholic characters, I've played heroin addicts, and those, I'm not somebody who's into substance, you know. So I see what those bad decisions led to. And the other thing I'll say is that every character I've ever played, good, bad, substance abuser, otherwise, they've all made me in some way braver, in some way funnier, in some way more shy, in some way they've all left an imprint on who I am. And that experience I'm grateful to, because I was allowed to explore a side of myself that maybe life and the situations of my life would have never granted me, you know. And that's kind of interesting, to play a journalist, to play a drunken rock and roller, to play a terrorist, to play a British cop in the 19th century, to play a fashion designer sort of agent person, and the many other things I've done. It's really cool to get that opportunity to explore someone else's life, someone else's universe, and allow the circumstances and situations and the relationships of their life to become my own.
Yeah.
And you know, I don't have a sister, right? But I've played someone who has a sister. You know, I've played people. You know, I was never a rock and roller. I can't sing to save my life or play guitar if I tried. But I got to be a rock and roller, you know, and I got to hear music as if I was, you know, Bob Dylan, you know, and that was kind of a bit of a fantasy for me. Still is, actually. Yeah, right. Yeah. Totally. So I think that you just need to make sure you've got a pulse on, hey, that's me over there, and I'm going to be over here with this character for some time, but when I need to get back to being Jeff, I got to go over there. Yeah. That's one. And the other thing is, I don't think you should be afraid of surrendering yourself to the character. I think that's our job, actually. Because surrendering yourself to the character means I'm going to buy in for real. I'm going to do this for real. And I'm going to let myself be as intimate with the character as I want the audience to be intimate with me in the character. And I owe it to them to play it for real. Because this story, David Coleman Headley's or whomever's, is real. This is happening between action and cut. And I owe it to them that I'm as real, intimate, and invested into the character as they want to be into the story. It's a big responsibility, and I relish it. I love it.
Yeah, about that, like when the stakes are so high with character like David Coleman Headley, who is bouncing off between being a mass murderer, between a conspiracy of being a mass murderer. So how do you play those stakes that are that high? Because you have to create a rich, believable performance. And most actors, I assume, have not been in the situation where they are responsible for others' lives at such a big level.
Well, I mean, look, I think, like I said, your first question was, how do I choose a character?
Yeah.
And the minute you get involved with a character, and you read that script, that sensory, the first couple times you read the script and you start getting into the material, you start to identify with the circumstances and the conflicts and the stakes. What's at stake, right? And okay, here's somebody who's fascinating. Here's somebody who is really, this is going to make great theater. This is going to make great cinema, right? And you see that on the page, but the actor has to pause and just do kind of a quick check. Do I really want to be this person? Do I want to let these voices into my head? Is that really what I want to do? And even though you might feel that, yeah, I want to do this, right? The inner life, your emotional self's like, yeah, let's go. Let's be a killer, rah, right? You start to feel that, you have to pause and say, hang on, I'm just Jeff Goldberg, regular guy. I would never hurt anybody ever under any circumstance. So am I sure that I want to bring that on board? And as long as you have that honest conversation with yourself at the beginning and throughout, it never goes away. And as long as you can still say yes, 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 then you should do it. And if at any point you feel the answer is no, then not only should you not do it, you can't do it. Because you're not being honest to yourself anymore. And if you're not being honest to yourself, how could you bring that same honesty to the character? It's impossible. It's impossible. The inner life will just shut down. You're lying. You're faking it. You're acting. You're not living. And I'm just not interested in that. Just not interested in that. Which is why, with me, I do one character for like 2 years, 3 years. I'm very fortunate. I'm very blessed with our studio that I have the opportunity to perform pretty much when I'd like and explore what I want. I've made some bad choices in my characters over the years, no doubt. But I bring a character on board for about 2-3 years. And I know that. And that's a real marriage in the cosmic soul. And I take that really seriously. So I make sure that I keep asking myself that question. And I know with David, there's going to come a time where I'm going to say, do I want to play a murderer? And the answer is going to be a no. I'm done with that. I'm done with bringing myself to that part of myself. When I played Jack Ray, who was an alcoholic musician, former heroin addict, there was a moment where I said, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to play a guy who's, a shitty father and a shitty human being to the people he loves. I don't want to do this anymore. So I stopped. And that's really important, I think, for me, and when you're honest with yourself about your acting, I think it's important that you just make sure, like, if I'm going to play these stakes, am I okay with that, right? And a lot of actors, they choose roles because they see on paper, wow, this is great stuff. This is a crazy person, right? Crazy people, I'm going to get an Academy Award for this one for sure because I'm playing crazy. But the question I ask is, do you really want to be crazy? Like, do you actually want to bring yourself to the edge of insanity and feel that and invite that into your life, I, for one, don't. I've never toyed with the idea of playing with someone who has real psychosis, because I just don't want to bring my life to that edge. In the case of David, he's definitely a very sick man, but he's not somebody who I would declare insane. He's a sociopath because he clearly uses everyone and has not even an ounce of love in his heart for the people around him. And it is all about him. But he's not schizophrenic. He's not, bipolar. He's none of those things. So I just think that in terms of stakes, ask yourself, do I really want to put on the skin of this human being? Do I want to invite these circumstances and these conflicts into my actual inner life? Do I really want my imagination to explore what it means to be someone like that? And if at any point you feel uncomfortable with that, you need to stop, because you're just not ready. And you should never do something because it's cool, or because it's popular, or because you think it's going to bring you fame or money. I mean, that's just, you're going to fail, and it's going to work against you. At least that's my opinion.
That's great. I would like to ask you more questions, but I think if someone from the audience wants to ask Jeff.
Yeah.
You said right now that when you're like at some point uncomfortable with a character, you should not do it. So you're saying that in the context that you're regularly doing a character, or just you want to do some character which is crazy? Because most of the people think crazy cool as in like, obviously, yeah, this is crazy, but the stakes are really high when you reach that character after a huge amount of research. People realize after that point that, okay, cool, the stakes are really high. You can't realize that shit till you could do that amount of research about the character. So in what context are you saying that you should not approach something when you're not ready?
Well, I mean, I think it's a good question. When should you approach something when you're not ready? That's really your question. Well, it's your job to be ready. It's your job. It's not the director's job. It's not the writer's job. The director's job is to direct. And he or she has this very clear job of to tell the story, right? Visually or with the stage. Their job is to tell the story. Yes? And the writer's job is to tell the story with his or her script. But in the case of the character, you're supposed to live the story in a real way. And if you're playing someone who you don't know anything about, or you know maybe a third about, you need to get that other two-thirds. And in the research that you do, emotional, historical, past, present, future, whatever, objective, subjective research you do, you absolutely have to invest yourself to ensure that you get really deep into that research so that you achieve a place where you say, okay, I'm comfortable, I know enough, right? Now, I'm one of those people who needs to spend months researching things, because that's the way I am. I have a good friend, and he says, Jeff, you're like a submariner. You're determined. You'll just keep going underwater. And that really is how I'm built. But I think that if an actor is approaching a piece, and at any point he or she says, I don't know if I'm ready, then that is a stop sign to do it. It's not a stop forever. It's a stop and circle back and get the research done. Get it done. Speak to the people you need to speak to. Read the books you need to read. Watch the movies you need to watch. Watch the documentaries you need to look at. Today we live in a world where we really kind of have access to everything. So the excuse that, I didn't know where to look, is ridiculous. It's just ridiculous. A question you'll get sometimes from female actors is, I've never played a mom and they want me to play a mom. How do I do that? Well, I mean, there's so much out there that you can look at in terms of newborn mothers, just a whole variety of things that you could do, from films that talk about mothers who have newborns to, actual research, to documentaries, to just go out and find a mom and talk to her and ask her what it was like. it's your job. And I think that actors at times can be lazy about that. They presume that the director is going to tell them what to do, or somehow the director is going to fill their cup. No, when you walk on set or when you walk into rehearsal, your cup should be full. And the job of the director, as far as I'm concerned, should be to say, okay, I like this, and we'll keep it, or pour some out, or we'll pour something new in. And the actor-director relationship, as far as I'm concerned, is a collaborative one, right? And that collaboration starts with you. And you need to know when you walk onto that set or into that rehearsal for your play, I'm ready. I'm ready. Now the director might change everything, but that work you've done will not benefit you. So I think that in the case of any role, the real responsibility to prepare is always on the actor's shoulders. At least that's my opinion. Because that's what makes you a professional. It's your job to know your job. So, yeah.
You just mentioned that you did these two roles. One is of course David Coleman Headley, and the other one was some rock star.
Mhm.
And in both the cases, I heard you saying that I'm like done with that.
Mhm.
So do you think that you feel regretted because that you did it, or because of the characters? That's part of question one. Related to that is, do you think that really affected? Not really. Do you think that has affected you so much that like you're not do it again?
Well, in the case of being done, I'm certainly not done with David. There was a moment there a couple of months ago where I kind of thought, maybe I'm done with this. It was mostly because I was tired of being bald, and I hate the beard with a passion. So I was just tired of looking like, somebody that I didn't even recognize. So I decided to take a breath, give it a thought. I grew my hair again, I keep my beard a little bit tighter, and I just did some shows of David with this different look, and I found that the look wasn't as important as I thought it was. So there's been this reinvention, and I'm enjoying that. It's this sort of new chapter with David. In the case of Jack Ray, the rock star fellow, yeah, I just hit a wall. I just hit a wall, and I said, I've done this enough. I've done this enough. I've enjoyed it. I've loved it. I love the script. I've loved playing this character. I've loved the work I did with my co-actor, Karan Pandit. We had a great time, but we're done. However, because I'm a human being, and because nothing ever really washes out of your skin, and because every actor gets a little selfish and a little hungry, I still feel myself sometimes, thinking, wonder how Jack Ray is. And I still pick up my phone and send a message across to my co-actor, Karan, and say, hey man, you want to do a cookie machine again? Until date, he's been busy, so the answer has been no. But I think that's the beauty of being an actor, particularly for the stage, is that I played Jack Ray for the first time in 2016. It's now 3 years later. I am such a different person than I was when I played Jack the first time. And I'd love to find out who I could be to Jack and who Jack could be to me today. So, whilst you do hit walls with your characters, the wall isn't made of concrete. It's made of imaginary stuff that will one day vanish, I think. So, yeah. It's just a constant cycle. Yeah, does anyone else have a question? Yeah, please.
So, when you're playing a real-life character, as an actor, we are always trying to, search for different ways to, portray a person. So, is there any, do you ever feel that, you're curtailed with the freedom with which you can play a real-life character? How do you balance that?
That's a really good question. When you're dealing with historical fact and real people, do you feel like there are some things you can and you can't say, or are you hemmed in by that? And that's a great question. Yes, no, and kind of. Yes, of course you want to be as accurate as possible. And in the case of David Coleman Headley, I needed to be as accurate as possible, because I'm dealing, like I said, with modern history. And it's a funny thing when history is actually an event from your real life. And 2611 is an event from the real life of everybody who has seen the show, all 25 of them, right? So yes, I need to be accurate, for sure. And how do you do that? You do that by, like what Pranav had asked me, the research. You just need to make sure that your research is bulletproof. You need to make sure that if one of the cops who interviewed one of the terrorists that survived, Qasab, is in the audience, you could talk to him. And if he's given an interview, you've read his interview, which I have, actually. That's actually happened. So you need to make sure that you know what you're talking about, because that historical inaccuracy, someone's going to come along and punch a hole in it, and it's going to deflate everything. So that's the first thing. That's the yes. The no is, at the end of the day, you are telling a story, and you're lensing that story through the perspective that you have discovered through your research. And inevitably, you have an opinion. You have an opinion, and it's okay to have an opinion. As a matter of fact, I think today, one of the saddest things that I see around me is how few people have opinions, right? I mean, everyone has an opinion, but they all sound the same because everyone's watching the same news or listening to the same thing on the radio or watching the same thing on Instagram or Facebook or whatever. And it's not that you have to have a unique opinion, but you should have your own. And when you do that as an artist and you have your own opinion, as long as you've made sure that the foundation on which you're building that opinion is real research, then it's okay. And it doesn't mean everyone's going to like it, but being an artist isn't always about being liked. As a matter of fact, I think being an artist has nothing to do with being liked. Being liked is wonderful, it's nice, but it's not the reason we do this, at least the reason I do it, for sure. I can think of a lot of other jobs that would make me more likable. And kind of because at the end of the day, your subjective perspective is going to meet the subjective perspective on the other side of the divide, which is that of the audience. And the interaction is going to begin with what they thought of it. And you have to be prepared for someone to say, no, that's not what it was. No, I didn't like that. No, that offended me. Because if I'm going to say, okay, this is my perspective of the event, I can't drape that in, well, it's the right one. It's the correct one and it's the only one. Because that's not fair. That's not fair to the audience. I rob their opportunity to interact with my material. And I want them to feel as engaged, and I want them to have as much ownership of my material as I do as the writer or the actor or the director. And every play, film I've ever made, that's something that I'm extremely aware of, is this is my thought. This is my reason for doing it. These are my politics and my beliefs, my morals. But I know that there's going to be someone out there who looks at it who completely disagrees with me in every way. And I want to have a conversation with that person. And the conversation that we have is through the material itself. Yes? And it's not about like and don't like. It's about engagement. Did I engage? So yes, you have to make sure you get the history, the politics, the events, the emotions. You have to make sure that research is solid. But then off of that foundation, build and don't be fearless in having your own perspective. But understand that perspective is going to meet an audience who's going to have a different opinion. And embrace that. Embrace it. I don't think the artist should be, our job is not to be a politician. Our job is not to be a priest or a leader. Our job is to just simply ask questions through our work and let our work tell stories and let our stories ask new questions. And the answers belong to the audience. They never belong to us. And that's the engagement I like to have with my work. And that's true of everything I've ever done. Truly. And I actually do think about that. Before I begin any project, I think about that a lot. And I really bring that on board. You know, why am I doing this? Okay, and what do I want to say? Okay, and let's go. But I know I'm going to meet someone along the way who's going to say, Jeff, you're out of your mind. And usually that person's related to me. It's either my mom, my dad, Ishan, my son is still too young, so he'll get there. But I'm very okay with that, you know. But as an artist, you have to believe in what you're doing. Otherwise, there's really no point. Yeah? Any other questions? Yeah.
How do you differ your research as a writer and as an actor?
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, I used to make this funny joke. It's not so funny. I found it funny. Writers are people you find in the cafes of Paris drinking wine at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and waxing lyrically about the books they've read and disagreeing with everything and everyone that they bump into. Directors are people who wear hard hats and go on to construction sites and knock buildings down to put them back together. And actors are those weird people doing cartwheels in the corner of the park. They're different jobs. They're different jobs. And as a writer, when I'm writing something, even if I know I'm going to act in it, I'm not directing myself on the page. I make sure not to do that. I recognize this is my job as a writer. My job as a writer is to tell the story in this script. I'm going to do that. When I get over to the acting, I then just completely forget that I've written the script, and most directors I've worked with usually agree with that statement because I screw up all the dialogues, and the only way I can justify that is like, hey, I wrote it. So, you know, they don't find that very funny, but it's my way of sort of justifying that I don't know my lines sometimes. But the truth is this, is that, you know, they're different jobs. I recognize them as different jobs. And when I'm doing one, I'm in the one, and when I'm doing the other, I'm in the other. And you have to be very disciplined with yourself about that. Of course, the two inform each other, but when I'm working with a director on a character in a scene, I would never tell the director, hey, listen, I didn't write it that way. Or if the director says, we got to cut this out, I'd never say, whoa, 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 you're touching. No, look, you're the director. You have been hired to tell the story visually. I have to give my trust over to you, right? So I'm very sensitive about that because I know that when I'm directing, I want the control that I need to do my job, right? And if someone's gonna say, oh, well, you know, then we're not really doing our jobs the right way around. You know, of course it's a collaboration, it's not so strict, but you have to make sure you know what your job is. Like, for instance, when I've done films, I mean, I'm a film director myself, I never look at the monitor. You know, they call it cut. I just ask the director, did you get what you want? And if he or she says yes, I go sit and have a cup of water. And I wait for the next shot. I don't want to look at the monitor. I'm not the visual storyteller. That director is. And I trust that whatever he or she saw on the monitor is what they wanted. They got what they wanted. Now, is it what I want? Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what I want. I'm not the director. And, you know, people say, oh, well, as an actor, don't you want to see what you look like? Absolutely not. I don't want to see what I look like. It's not a question of vanity or I think that I'm ugly or something. It's, I'm in character in a shot of a movie. And if the director saw in that frame on his or her monitor what is the image he or she wants for his or her movie, cool, that's fine with me. If they think they saw the performance they wanted, great. I have total trust in my director because it's their job. And as a director myself, if I start looking at the monitor, I might start making decisions about my role or about what I think it should look like. Not my job. I'm just there to be the actor, and vice versa in other arenas when I'm doing different things. I'm very strict with myself about that, and I'm a big believer in that. Very big believer in that, which is I'm the actor. I'm the actor. I'm the writer. I'm the writer. I'm the director. I'm the director. When I'm the writer, actor, director, and I've done that, when I'm writing, I'm at the cafe. When I'm directing, I'm on set knocking buildings down. And when I'm acting, I'm on the stage or in front of the lens, and that's it. That's very important, very, very important for me. Any other questions? Yeah.
Do you prefer like your version of the character when you read the script, or what the character comes out to be when you read the script? Like, or does it depend on the character to character?
I think, the first time I read a script, I'm immediately checking 1,000 boxes in my head. But the first thing, before I, what I try to remind myself of this a lot, which is, once upon a time, I was just a guy named Jeff who liked movies in theater. And I just liked it, right? I just was an audience member like anyone else. I didn't know how this stuff was done. I didn't know how it was made. I never trained. I was just a teenage kid. And I always try to bring that back. If I read something and I'm like, wow, I really like this, that's my first impression. And I love that. I love when I read something and I'm like, this is great. This is cool. And then I start to use the tools of preparation for whatever role I'm going to be executing. So once I get into that secondary and third part of where I start preparing things and making my notes and doing my research and building, I constantly, as an actor, just kind of check in with my director. This is okay, right? You like this, right? This is what I'm working on. It's okay, yeah? Or if the director is willing to sit down and have like a nice long talk, which most directors really are, they're super generous with their time about this, then yeah, it's totally like that exchange starts there, okay? Because ultimately, like I said, they're the storyteller, and I have to trust that their vision is the one we're aiming to execute, right? And have I ever had the experience where I was working on something and my vision was different than the director's? Yeah, and I got fired. I got fired. And actually I was glad I got fired. I was, because I didn't want to do what was being asked of me, and the director didn't want what I was doing. So, in fairness to his film and his production, I shouldn't have been there. And I'm very glad I wasn't. It just, he wanted X and I wanted Y. There was absolutely no bad blood in terms of the creative choices. It was just, he saw it that way, I saw it this way, and we decided to shake hands and call it even. It's never fun to be fired, but it was fine. I got over it pretty quick. Nothing a night out drinking with your friends couldn't take care of. So, Any other questions? Okay. Sure? Okay.
It's great chatting with you, Jeff.
Good chatting to you, Pranav.
Yeah, amazing experience.
Hardly. Thank you very much. It was really fun to talk about this. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.